Hello, MCU fans. Today we're going to take a look at whether we can learn some lessons from the 25 Moments Days of Future Past marketing website. Now, this thing was put out in 2014, like 10 years ago, but somehow I completely missed it and only learned about it like legit a week ago. So thank you so much to Various from the Discord server for pointing this thing out to me. It is so cool. I don't normally talk about marketing materials because you just don't know if they're canon or not, but this thing has 25 moments fleshing out the history of the X-Men. It's really cool. I think you'll enjoy it. So let's dive right in and see what we can find out. Don't forget, we have a June contest running all month long. Be a subscriber, leave a comment. You could win a book or a steelbook. Best of luck. And we have a membership option with lots of cool perks in case you might be interested in that. So make sure to check it out. Okay, so the 25 Moments website has now been archived away. However, you can still reach the archive. So if you want to check it out after this video, I have a link in the description so you can go out there and spend some time just pouring through it. And in fact, I have a link to a video about the website, which is really cool. So make sure to check it out in detail. You'll love it. In particular, the 25 moments are covering the period of time during the original X-Men timeline, before it was rewritten during Days of Future Past. So we're talking from 1962 to 2023. Also, it is worth noting, I have now moved the X-Men original trilogy into the 90s. If you haven't seen my Dark Phoenix video, I think that gives some really good hints as to where this original trilogy should be placed. Plus, I had totally forgotten, but the first X-Men movie actually has the Twin Towers in it. So it seems like it needs to at least be before 2001. So anyway, if you want to know why I moved to the 90s, you can check out the Dark Phoenix video. But I will point out the 25 moments do seem to indicate the original trilogy is in the 2000s after all. So you can't win with the original trilogy. I mean, the X-Men timeline is like a bowl of spaghetti. You just enjoy the movies and place them wherever you want personally in the timeline. But I am kind of leaning towards the 90s, but we'll see what the 25 moments have to tell us. Speaking of, moment number one goes all the way back to 1962. In fact, you can tell this is a scene from the First Class movie with Magneto and the whole Cuban Missile Crisis. And notice at the end it explains that an unidentified group with unexplained powers are the ones that cause the problems. Because you remember, in First Class, Professor X wiped everyone's minds so they didn't realize that the mutants and Magneto, etc., were the problem. All right, so moment number two moves us to 1963, where Eric Lehnsherr is blamed for JFK's death. You might remember in Days of Future Past, that was a really important point where the whole magic bullet was actually being moved around by Magneto and his powers. In fact, Fox put out a video about the bent bullet. You can check it out. It's still out there online on their X-Men Movies YouTube, and it's pretty cool. You know, really explains why he was being blamed for it. And remember, in Days of Future Past, it was a really key point because Magneto was in prison. They had to break him out. And as Professor X said, what else explains a bullet miraculously curving through the air? So yeah, very cool. They're saying that was in 1963 when he was jailed and blamed for JFK's death. Then we moved to 1965. And this is kind of cool. It's when the School for Gifted Youngsters is opened. I guess I never really knew when the school was open. They don't really make it particularly clear in any of the X-Men movies, although they do allude to it in Days of Future Past, because the Beast says right after the school was opened, just after the first semester, the war in Vietnam got worse, and that caused problems for the school. So, yeah, it would make sense that it would be opened around 1965. So, very cool. All right, the next moment is 1967, Trask Industries develops artificial limbs. Notice it explains that they're prosthetics through DNA-generated artificial limbs. And one of the other cool things you can find on this website are some history pages. And this one has the genetic innovations in modern times and lists everything, including Trask himself. And notice 1967, it reiterates DNA-generated artificial limbs. So we'll come back to this list a couple times as we go through the moments. All right, so then we move to 1972. This one's kind of funny. So Watergate gets a bit of a new twist. Those 18 and a half minutes that were missing, well, it was actually a meeting between Trask and Nixon, an illegal and improper meeting on top of that. So I do love that the X-Men movies try to, stick to history, but, with a little spin each time. So very cool. So now we move to the next moment, which is 1973. Trask Industries announces the Sentinel Mark I. And remember, this is the pivotal moment in 1973 that leads to all the problems in 2023 because Trask is assassinated by Mystique, and that leads to the Sentinel program getting launched, and of course, leads to the disaster in 2023. So they go back in time to reset this event. Now, we see it also, by the way, in the genetic innovations list here. 1973, Trask Industries unveils the Sentinel program. So it's all lining up really well. But let's talk a little bit more about what happened in the original timeline. So we know from the movie that this was happening right around the time of the Paris Peace Accords in 1973. And that's very important because we learned in real history that the Paris Peace Accords were signed January of 1973, and that's what led to a ceasefire and the GIs getting out of Vietnam. Okay, so we find out, though, in the movie, Mystique kills Trask in the original timeline, and because of that, I'm going to guess the Paris Peace Accords weren't signed. So here's the ramifications of that. Wolverine, we see, is, back home, probably on a break from the war, because everybody, gets breaks here and there, and he's having an afternoon delight, obviously, when he gets caught. But I'm guessing because Mystique killed Trask, they didn't sign the Paris Peace Accords, because, there was an assassination by a mutant. They're not going to sign the Paris Peace Accords. That meant the war continued on, and that's why Sabretooth and Wolverine in the original timeline went back to war again. And, of course, eventually got arrested and thrown into prison, which led to the Wolverine Origins movie. So, yeah, I really think it fits that the Paris Peace Accords weren't signed because of the assassination. All right, so let's move to the next moment. 1975, Xavier goes to Washington. This is really interesting. So Professor Xavier appears before the U.S. House of Representatives in a private closed session asking for mutant freedoms, including integration and privacy. Very cool. All right, the next moment, this one's really funny. 1977, good old Pietro cheats in track and field events, right? Athletic officials adopt a genetic testing policy in partnership with Trask Industries in which no athletes carrying the Mutant X gene can compete in professional sporting events. This occurs following the investigation of Pietro Maximoff, Quicksilver, who broke 8 world records in track and field events. So obviously in the revised timeline, this didn't happen. But in the original timeline, yeah, that's funny. That is really funny. Then we move to 1984, where mutants are dubbed God's Curse. Yikes. Popular televangelist minister Bob Bell and his organization, The Human Majority, champion a strong anti-mutant movement. Among their principles is the belief that disease is God's curse for mutant integration. Yeesh. Man. Then we move to 1986, where once again, real-world events are used in the history. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster occurs, and when the plant melts down, it causes a spike in premature mutant expressions for generations. Wild. Then we move to 1988, a Berlin Wall protest. Okay, this is fascinating. A few renegade mutants knocked down a mile-long section of the Berlin Wall in an act of protest, killing 23 people and injuring over 200. The protest alarmed citizens of West Germany, sparking anti-mutant policies. The Berlin Wall stands today. Wild. And East Germany has been designated as a mutant zone. Craziness. We move to 1989 when a private mutant registry is started. So in partnership with Trask Industries, the FBI unveils a method of using DNA evidence at crime scenes to identify criminals. Off the record, Trask Industries also begins building a private mutant registry from this database of DNA, with plans to sell the information to wealthy world governments. Goodness. Then we move to 1991. South Africa becomes a mutant haven. As the global conversation on mutant-human relations grows, South Africa proudly declares their country a unified and united refuge for all. Cool. Then in 1994, mutant freedom fighters get involved in the Zapatista resistance. So once again, real-world events. So the Zapatista resistance, aided by mutant freedom fighters, engages in armed conflict against the Mexican government in southern Mexico. So then we move to 1996, and I don't know if you had mad cow disease on your bingo card, but sure enough, it gets a reference in these 25 moments. X gene testing at Trask Industries leads to global epidemic. An early attempt at a cure for the X gene fails when animal testing goes awry, causing widespread sickness commonly referred to as mad cow disease. Crazy. Then we go to 2001 when Guantanamo Bay Mutant Detention Center opens. So the U.S. government contracts Trask Industries to build Camp X-Ray in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. The camp is a detention center for mutants dangerous enough to be deemed national security threats. So this is interesting. We're now around the time of when many people place the original trilogy, and it's kind of wild to think that there are literally mutant detention center out there. Now, granted, it's secret. They're keeping it secret, so the X-Men probably wouldn't have known about this, but still, that's wild. All right, so then we move to 2006. So here's the big reference to The Last Stand. Notice, that is the aftermath, basically, of Last Stand. It says the president works with the X-Men to rebuild the bridge and relations with mutants. Worthington Labs introduces a vaccine that claims to eradicate the X gene, which obviously that's from Last Stand, leading to violent uprisings from mutant factions that resulted in the destruction of the Golden Gate Bridge. Recognizing the need to improve human-mutant relations, the president appoints Beast as ambassador to the UN. So, if you're somebody who believes the original trilogy is in the 2000s, this would be pretty good evidence, because this says that when they were marketing Days of Future Past, they felt it was in 2006. Again, if you watch my video on Dark Phoenix, I think it later retconned this to move it back into the 90s, but still, this is pretty strong evidence for the 2000s. I will point out, though, that in The Last Stand, it looks like there's a magazine here that if you zoom in, says 2005. So who knows when this thing is, right? October 2005, 2006, or the 90s. Whatever floats your boat, go with it, I say. All right. So anyway, definitely the 25 moments puts it in 2006. All right. So then we move to 2008 when a mutant wall is built. So the U.S. erects a 2,000-mile-long wall along the Mexican border. Politicians maintain the structure as necessary measure for the prevention of illegal immigration. Others contend that the wall is a last-ditch effort to contain Mexico's growing population of mutant rebels. Man, talk about ripping it right out of the pages of today. Man, talking about walls today, still. Craziness. All right, 2009, Mutant Inhibitor Collar is created, right? After a string of breakouts from Camp X-Ray, which we learned about that earlier, by high-powered mutants, Trask Industries develops a collar to inhibit mutant abilities. And again, on the website, you can just keep digging through so much cool information. They talk about some of the tech, and in particular, they have a description of the inhibitor collar and more information on exactly how it works. All right, so then we move to 2010. This is wild. Trask Industries acquires Xavier's school? So many people, myself included, put The Wolverine in 2013. That's 3 years after this. So when we see Wolverine in that movie, remember he's off hiding in the mountains and living as a hermit, maybe this is why? Because the school's gone. So let's read this here. The mutant safe haven becomes a testing lab for Trask Industries. Xavier's school for gifted youngsters closes. Trask Industries renovates the mansion into a research facility. Man, I want to know more about this. What on earth happened? How did they let it get taken over? Wild. So that's in 2010. All right, so 2011, there's a march on the X-Mansion as mutants protest the cure. So, to protest the billion-dollar mutant cure arms race led by Trask Industries, Yoshida Corp., we all know Yoshida, right, from the Wolverine, and other multinational pharmaceutical companies occupy Wall Street, marches from the X-Mansion to Zuccotti Park. Sentinels attack the peaceful mutant demonstration. In the ensuing chaos, Worthington III, the mutant known as Angel, is killed. Yikes. So, again, this is still before the Wolverine. There is just craziness going on right now. All right, 2012. Blink helps rescue mutants from prison camps. 30 mutants are rescued from Trask mutant prison camps. Clarice Ferguson, a.k.a. Blink, is instrumental in smuggling 30 detained mutants out of the Trask prison camps. So, of course, Blink appears in Days of Future Past, but also in The Gifted. And I personally think The Gifted does fall in this original timeline. So, yeah, very cool. Then 2013. Okay, we need to talk about this. So, Trask announces the Sentinel Mark X. So, according to moment number 23, the next generation of the Sentinel program promises the definitive containment of the mutant threat. Responding to the rise of mutant rebels, Trask Laboratories unveils the next generation in its Sentinel line, the Sentinel Mark X. Among the new model's many upgrades is its ability to shapeshift and physically adapt to environments. So obviously this is the version of the Sentinels that we see in Days of Future Past. But in 2013, I got to kind of cry foul on that. I don't see how it could have been in 2013. And in fact, if we go back to this Genetic Innovations in Modern Times checklist, it says 2020 is when Trask Industries announces the Sentinel Mark X program. So, okay, Fox, even on their own website, can't keep it straight. Although I will say 2020 makes more sense to me. That, I don't see this happening as early as 2013. But let me know your thoughts. I mean, which of these two do we trust, or do we trust it at all, right? It's marketing material. It doesn't even have to be canon. But if we try to make it canon, I really feel 2020 works better. Because, remember, in The Wolverine, this is from the post-credit scene in The Wolverine, he sees Trask Industries on TV, and they're talking about, prosthetic arms, basically, not the, Mark X Sentinel. Now, I don't know that they would be advertising that on TV. I get that. But it just doesn't seem like we'd be talking about, a robotic arm when they're building the Mark X Sentinel. So anyway, I like 2020 much better. All right, so then we move to 2015, the death of Hank McCoy. So we learn that the mutant most famous for successfully integrating with the human population is murdered. Hank McCoy is dragged from his home and murdered by an angry mob of human majority protesters. Remember, we heard about them earlier, outside his home in upstate New York. Yikes. And then the final moment number 25, 2018, Bishop forms the Free Mutants organization. Bishop forms the first the militant mutant organization. Bishop, a Camp X-ray escapee, builds a global network of mutant resistance dubbed the Free Mutants. So that's really cool because obviously Bishop shows up in Days of Future Past. So leading us right up to basically, I think 2020 is the next event of the Mark X, but then 2023, we're into Days of Future Past. So there you go. This is, again, filling this gap between 1962 and 2023. So let me know your thoughts. Do you think it's canon? If you do think it's canon, do you think it makes the original trilogy move to the 2000s? Or because they obviously had some errors in there with that 2013, are you okay with it staying in the 90s? Love to know your thoughts on all this, but at the end of the day, honestly, it's impossible to come up with a perfect timeline, so whatever you land on is perfectly fine. I'm just interested in your thoughts, so let me know in the comments. And don't forget, June contest, all month long. Be a subscriber, leave a comment, win a book or a steelbook. And of course, we have that membership option in case you're interested in that. And then I always like to mention the Discord. There he is, Various, the man, telling me all about this really cool website. We'd love to have you join us. We have over 1,300 members all across the globe, conversations happening 24/7. We want you to be a part of them. Also, if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we'll all continue to enjoy the ever-growing, ever-changing Marvel Cinematic Universe.